Hello and welcome to Waking Up with Brooke Sprowl. My guest today is Indy Rishi Singh. Indy, welcome.
Thanks so much, Brooke.
Go ahead and introduce yourself to get started.
Maybe what if we introduce ourselves with sound? So this is my introduction. I'm going to give you my pedigree, who I am, what college I went to, who I mentored with. Did you
I
get that?
love it. That was beautiful.
So you got my pedigree. You know who I am, what I am, what I'm about. The interview's over, right? I mean, I at this point in my life, I feel I'm very wary about the people who talk about themselves too much and need to advertise themselves so much versus those who actually do. And so I almost feel like that flute right there, what I just did, that says much more than me telling you my journey, my story, blah, blah, blah. This is where, this, that, blah, blah. Like that's all great, but we all have our journeys. But can we synthesize our journey into something that produces harmony for other people? That's the interesting thing, the nugget.
That's so beautiful. And I've really been meditating on the relationship between spirituality and play lately. And as I
Mm.
just see you embody this playful spirit, I'm curious, tell me how you see that.
You can't go through any sort of understanding without suffering, like real understanding, authentic understanding without suffering. And it's funny that the people in my life who I've looked up to, who I've mentored from, who I've learned the most from and gained the most from, were people who had developed a wonderful joyfulness about life and even about challenges. Like when challenges would come their way, they would be joyful about the challenge rather than like reactive to it or reactive to a suffering, right? And I've always wanted to embody that myself. And I certainly think that there's something going on with our inner children where we are turned off from play at a young age. I mean, ironically, right, Brooke, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, but even adults play games, right? We go to casinos, we play games, we have these like games on our phones now that everybody plays. So we never stop being our inner child, right? But what if but actually like leaning into play as a form of therapy, leaning as a play as a form of problem solving for our own lives and our collective lives? What if that's like a way that we can move through really difficult stuff? Like what if that's a way?
Yeah, and the way I see life in some ways is it's sort of like a video game. And if I can see it as a series of tests and challenges that are actually serving to help me expand and actualize my full potential as a human being, then I can play, then I can laugh, then I can sort of embody that spirit of, oh, this is all just a game.
Right.
This is not, the way that we engage with life so seriously can, I think, detract from the beauty, the joy of every aspect of existence. And at the same time, what I really struggle with is, how do we play and also validate our own experience of suffering? Because the suffering, the pain, the struggle, the uncertainty is all very real. And so, how do we play without bypassing? How do we
Right.
play without dismissing or trivializing what feels really powerful and painful in moments? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, that's beautiful. We are at this really powerful inflection point where there's multiple varieties of bypassing, right? There's spiritual bypassing, right? Where people are like, oh, like I'm feel too good to bother with the suffering of others, right? Or whatever is happening. And there's economic bypassing, right? We're like, well, I'm wealthy, I'm fine, I got whatever's happening to poor people, that's on them, it's their fault, right? So there's all kinds of different bypassing that's happening, and ultimately, what all of that is, it's a sad situation to not feel the interconnectedness of things, right? And so when we don't feel that interconnectedness, how can you're always going to be seeking happiness outside of yourself. You're always going to be seeking wholeness outside of yourself if you don't feel interconnected with everything. And that being said, coming back to play and as a form of bypassing, well, play doesn't always necessarily mean that you're just going to be laughing and like silly all the time. Sometimes we play so that we can feel the sadness, right? I mean, I'll give you a interesting frame. When we watch a movie, right, or a TV show, and it brings us to tears, right? That what's happening in that show or that movie, is that happening to us?
It's interesting. I was thinking of the word play, like a play is,
A play.
is
So
play. Yeah, I've never thought about that
so
before.
we're playing with our emotions by watching somebody else go through something, where so there is play also in leaning and under and connecting with sadness or loss or grief or whatever, right? Or overcoming, right? You ever notice when you watch something and you see a hero overcome a bunch of challenges, and we feel that, we cry too in that moment of triumph, right? So we can play those emotions out as well. It's not just all about being giddy and happy and blissful.
Mhm. And yet, I think about like some kind of idealized version of like the wise sage who just like always has that smirk, always has that knowing smile, or that laughter, that childlike spirit of, and regardless of the circumstances. And I guess, the question for me becomes like, how do you cultivate that? What practices, what can we do, it's like I have all these ideals that I want to embody. And then I sometimes find myself struggling with what practices can I use to really facilitate the embodiment and enactment of, my values. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I got tons of thoughts on that. And forget thoughts, I got
Lay
tons
it
of
on
feelings.
me.
I got
Lay it on
feelings.
me.
I got feelings. I got thoughts. I don't knows. I got a lot of things for that. But I personally have been practicing the science of laughter. And I say practicing the science of laughter, right? Because it is a practice, right? It's like a muscle. We kind of get turned off. I mean, you got to think about this, Brooke. How many times, and listeners out there, how many times do you think babies laugh in a day? Like babies up to like 1 year old. What do you think?
I have no idea.
300 times a day, babies laugh.
300
Okay.
times.
Did you know that babies laugh even if they're deaf and blind?
Oh.
So we're not learning to laugh. It is actually a physiological action that we're doing. A deaf and blind baby is not hearing it or seeing it, right? They're laughing because it's a part of our innate physiological structure, right? So we laugh for a lot of reasons, and there might be profound reasons for that, because when you study laughter, you're like, wait, it improves your immune system, improves your endocrine system, improves your, it brings down your wanting of dopamine, so you release your own dopamine. So if you have substance abuse or social media abuse, so all these different things, laughter is hacking all those. By the way, laughter makes your sex better too, because if you laugh more, you're going to have better blood flow. You're also going to be preventing maybe premature ejaculation. That's all another conversation. But throwing out a lot of those things, laughter has to be practiced. So what you're saying is like, hey, if you're going through stuff, yeah, one day laughter might work because you feel good, but another day you might be faced with some challenges. Question is, can you then practice when you get faced with the challenges? Can you practice laughter or some sense of just laughing at the problem before you address it? It's not ignoring the problem, but maybe you laugh at something that bothers you. Maybe somebody cuts you off on the road and you laugh and you make a joke out of it. You be witty about it and you be like, oh, that person probably has to go take a poop really badly. That's why they're cutting me off, right? We are such creative, innovative beings, and some of us are funny. Brooke, you're funny, right? Other people are funny. We can make a joke when a lot of times we are just angry and we use our intellect to like hurt ourselves, but we're not actually like transmuting the situation. It has nothing to do with us. Maybe it's not even that important, but we take on so much by not turning it into a joke and laughing about it. In fact, now we're overly sensitive about jokes. You see in the world how people are like not being able to laugh, and then now they're being controlling and demonstrative. And oh my God, weird stuff happens when we don't laugh.
Mm. Wow, how powerful. I had no idea all those health benefits. What you said about dopamine was really interesting. And I'm also aware that it increases vagal tone to laugh. So that's, helps with trauma and resiliency. So very cool hearing about that. Now, when you talk about practicing the science, the science of laughter, but practicing laughter, tell me what you mean by that. How do you practice? How do you build that muscle?
Well, before I even answer that, I have started something this year that I would love for you and your followers to kind of, tune in if you want, or tune out if it's kind of weird. It's okay, I get it, it's kind of weird. But one of my mentors encouraged me to start hashtag 2023 year of laughter. That let's make this year a year that we practice laughter and we do it use it in different ways, and we'll explore what happens. Let's see how big it gets. I don't know. It might be super small, it might turn into something really big. But laughter, in that way, like practicing laughter, it's about like finding different ways to access laughter. When I get in groups and I do these laughter, I call them neuroplasticity meditations, right? Neuroplasticity laughter play shops. And I've done it with like corporations, I've done it with nonprofits, I've done it at conferences and everything. And what happens is I love to create a space where people also add their practice of laughter or their ideas of laughter. And it's so fun to hold space for creativity around ways for us to be resilient. That being said, a great practice that I like is when you're late. Like you ever get late for stuff, Brooke?
Never.
You're never late.
I'm always late. I totally am always late. I'm really bad. I'm notoriously bad about being on time.
So the question, Brooke, is when we're late and we stress out, do we get anywhere faster? Does time speed up when we stress out?
No.
But what happens to our body and our mind when we stress?
Tension, pressure, stress, and friction.
Do we make better decisions when we're stressed?
No.
So that's why sometimes people get in crashes, or maybe they forget something at home, or like the stress actually makes the whole scenario worse, right?
I was just thinking about like the God's eye view of our lives and how silly, like we get so stressed out about being 10 minutes late to a meeting. And it's like just the absurdity of the things that bring us so much suffering. Really, I mean, suffering may be a little bit strong, but just like the things that deprive us of the beauty and presence of our lives are so trivial. And we get so wrapped up in the drama and the meaning that we place on these things that it's just really, I think one practice that I'd like to, implement as I'm talking is just kind of zooming out, like 10 years from now, is it going to matter that I was late for this meeting?
So let's actually practice that. And all your listeners can try this out too. Okay. Right. Let's do a practice of laughter that we can practice. Right. So it might not be perfect right now. We'll practice it. When you have a jump shot, 3-point shot, you don't just automatically make 3-pointers. You got to go and practice to be good at it. Right. So let's practice this laughter for being late. And by the way, put a pin in it. What you were just saying right now, put a pin on, we're going to come back to this. Unnecessary suffering versus suffering. Unnecessary suffering. Okay, put that on the side. Okay, so let's say we're late for something. Let's say next time we're 10 minutes late, Brooke. We're late. Let's practice. Let's open up our vocal cords and we're just going to laugh at the situation of being late. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to go like this. You look at your phone, look at your watch or your phone or whatever. Let me see. You look at your phone or your watch or whatever. You're like, oh, open up your vocal cords, Brooke. Oh.
You want me to do this right now?
Yeah, please.
Okay. You want me to look at my watch?
Yeah, look at your watch.
Okay.
Okay, then you're gonna run like this. Let me see you run. Just throw it away. Right? So you got it?
I got it.
so the next time when you're late, right, make this whatever you want. It's a practice. Maybe you don't want to throw your arms, maybe you want to go like this, maybe you want to do some other action. But my encouragement is to it's almost like a psychic release too, because when we're building up stress and tension, we're getting more rigid, our bodies are getting more firm. In fact, we're restricting our blood vessels, so that's where heart attacks might generate from, right?
Okay, I have to fact check that before you continue, because this is really important. I heard a TED talk about this, and it's actually a myth that stress causes health issues. It's only what this researcher found who was advertising that for many years. She actually found that stress only causes health issues if you believe it causes health issues.
Whoa.
And so it's really destructive actually to perpetuate the myth that stress causes health issues, because then people believe it and it actually comes true. Just wanted to interject that.
But the question is when we are engaging in some habit or practice that is hurting ourselves and it's not really improving the conditions of what we're in, the situation we're in,
of course,
it might be wise to try something completely on the other end to see in yourself, does that actually bring you to a place of homeostasis? Because ideally we want to be in homeostasis. Brooke, would you agree?
I think so. Yeah, I think, and I often think about the relationship between nervous system regulation and spiritual awakening awareness. It's like, is, being deeply present and spiritually connected, is it just a function of mastering the nervous system and being really grounded and centered in our being?
Sure. Yeah. And a part of mastering that nervous system might be that when you are getting scared or angry or frustrated or whatever, that you have something you can use. You could a tool or some tools you can use or adapt in that moment, because it might never be the same moment again. It'll just be a different situation. But can you adapt your tool for the
Yes,
moment?
exactly. A collaborator who I speak to a lot is John Vervaeke. He talks about having an ecology of practices.
Oh, I
And
love
I
that.
think that that's beautiful. It's like, how do we develop this diversification of
Right.
the ways that we can relate to life in ways that are nimble and, you know, like different tools for different things. And I think that that's one of the damaging things about the self-help culture, is that each modality just wants to paint such a broad brush, because that's
Right.
what you can sell, is
Right.
here's this one thing, here's this 3 steps to
Yeah.
transformation, and this is the way, and this is the only thing you need. It's really about developing this like robust, anti-fragile ecosystem of practices that we can, you know, draw from at different points in time, and then learning what is most effective and when,
Yeah.
and practicing. And what you talked about the, you know, shooting 3-pointers and mastery, it's like, it's something that's so endemic to our Western culture, is this myth that if you just understand something intellectually, you should be able to just get it and do it. It's
Wait,
like,
I got
nothing,
certified though. Brooke, I got certified.
nothing,
What are you
nothing
talking
works.
about?
Nothing works like that. It's like, you don't show up to your first piano lesson and expect to, you know, play a complex symphony. You don't expect to start, you know, to do a sport the first time and be a master. I'm more alluding to this idea that we think that, oh, I understand these spiritual ideas, so now I should just be able to live and embody them. And it's like, no, spirituality is like anything else. It's a, you know, skill, it's a muscle that builds over time with practice. And I, for one, I know I'm so guilty of just wanting that quick, you know, way
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
to enlightenment. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, this is something you have to master over a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
How ridiculous that we think, and this isn't just for spirituality, it's for psychology too. Like, people think, oh, I understand my problems, so I should be able to break all these psychological patterns. It's like, these things have been, you know, practiced and
Right.
embodied and enacted for, you know, however old you are, you know, for decades for most of us. And we
Well,
expect to just snap our fingers and be rid of them. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And yet that's how people think. And that's part of what's so self-defeating in people's
mhm.
approaches, is if they have that mentality, then they're going to give up before they even start.
Right. Right. Exactly. And, I'm glad you're saying that too, because there is a funny element here. You said the word spirituality several times, right? So, there's spirituality, but when you come from the Eastern perspective, like especially where I'm from in India, whether you come from the Sikhi perspective, the Vedic perspective, spirituality talks about the interrelatedness of everything, the interconnectedness of it, which is a very ecological way of thinking, right? Like, we are literally sharing, we're all stardust, we're all eat the same, we eat the soil, the air we breathe, the breathe out. Like, I mean, we're literally interconnected from a scientific point of view, not even from a spiritual one, right? So that's what we mean in the East or in indigenous communities. In the West, spirituality has been kind of more connected. I'm probably generalizing, but like, there's a little bit more connection to like religion and like that kind of structure. Now, if we come from that space of spirituality being interconnectedness, interrelatedness, here's a crazy hack for you, Brooke, and not just for you, for your listeners out there, anybody out there who's struggling with mental illness or mental health, right? If we are interconnected from a scientific perspective, anyone else's suffering is also our own suffering. So you can't be comfortable sitting anywhere in a place of comfort. And if there is anywhere there's unnecessary suffering happening, it's not like, oh, it's just an animal eating another animal because they eat it, but there's actually suffering happening because there's a system that's causing suffering. There is no way you're not going to feel. I mean, Dr. Gabor Mate talks about this. John Vervaeke, you brought him up, talks about the systems problems. There's a few people now are starting to finally speak up that the system itself is causing so much suffering that if we don't impact that system, even if we're comfortable, we're still going to be experiencing some sort of weird thing because we're connected to everything. Now, we can go dive into that deeper, but that's a hack for everyone, that if you want to feel better, go and be of service for those who are less fortunate and see what happens. Just see for yourself. How do you feel?
Absolutely. And, I think a lot and talk a lot about this relationship between self and other, that really there's not a differentiation, that so much of that is taught. It's a learned way of perceiving the world.
Right.
And just as you can learn it, you can unlearn it. And as you begin to unlearn it and unmask, the fundamental nature of reality and consciousness and being, you discover that, you're not separate from anyone else. And so, as you say, anyone who's suffering is contributing to your suffering. There's not this kind of false dichotomy between people or between us and the world that we've learned, this kind of Cartesian, mind-body dualism, self-other dualism, self-life dual, self-world dualism, these kind of this myth of separation that most of us in the West have been, unconsciously indoctrinated into, and that we live out. And it's what's interesting to me is that the materialist frame is being disproven by people at the forefront of physics. I'm not talking about like the new age people who have
no. We're talking about actual quantum scientists.
Like Donald Hoffman, who's like, and what physicists are saying is that like there's not actually a way that space-time can exist. And so what Hoffman is doing is he's trying to find a way, which is just sort of bonkers to me that this is even possible, but he's basically finding a way to map out what's beneath space-time, which how do you measure something outside of space-time? But somehow he's able to measure like, and I don't understand this at all, but like some kind of offshoot of it. And his model, what he's hoping to create is something that in which we can predict consciousness. So his idea is that consciousness is the fundamental ontological substrate of reality, and that space-time is actually a projection that is, and it's like he's doing the math on this, and he's trying to create predictive models of consciousness where he's like, if this is to be scientifically rigorous, we have to be able to have a predictive element to it that also doesn't lose our previous models of reality in the way that, relativity and Einstein's work with special relativity doesn't negate Newtonian physics. It transcends and includes Newtonian physics. Right. And so that's kind of his idea. It's just like, wow, that's so beautiful, because that's what all the ancient spiritual traditions, that's what the Neoplatonic, that's what the Buddhists have talked about.
Maybe the Egyptians before they got, maybe the Vedics, maybe the Mayans, right?
I'm sure. I just am not familiar enough with all these different traditions to speak to them. I'm sure, but it's like, this is what, spiritual traditions have been talking about for centuries, is that this is an illusion. What we think is real is not real. Shamanic traditions, non-ordinary reality versus ordinary reality. I love that terminology. As someone who's passionate about words too, I feel like you could appreciate this. I love the terminology of non-ordinary reality, because it's not saying, it's saying that that's equally real. It's not like this is real and that's this. Even words like imaginal sort of make it sound like that's imaginative, that's the not real place. But actually there's an inversion, I think, for people who talk about noetic consciousness, for example, that this is the dream and that's reality. I like the ordinary and non-ordinary reality.
That's cool. I like that,
because it's like they're both real and but they're just different kinds of reality, and that really resonates with my experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I can't speak to the other indigenous cultures, but I do find myself quickly making relationships with people from other, traditions, because we have shared perspectives on reality, which is kind of cool. But this idea that that actually all the information in the universe is already inside of us. Like you don't need to go to a book, or you don't need to go to the internet. Even you don't need to go develop an instrument to like look what's out in the stars or look what's in the molecules between us. Actually, you can access that information if you sit still and you listen, and you really go within, and you get out of the external sensory world and you go within, and then you can access a whole database that has always existed, and maybe even what's going to exist as well. Like maybe if time is also relative, maybe we can access time, future, past, everything as well. I don't know though. I'm not going to say, listen, Brooke, I'm not certified, so I can't say anything. I'm not certified.
This other collective of physicists are doing some research on what's called emergence theory, which I discovered because I originally called my model emergence theory. And so someone sent this my way.
Oh, funny.
And they talk about, this model of space-time that is, again, I can't even like explain this stuff because I'm not a physicist at all. But they basically talk about the illusory nature of time, which, Einstein said, for those of us who understand physics, time is but a stubbornly persistent illusion.
Brooke, what did
Yes.
one atom say to another atom that was kind of feeling a little depressed and sad?
What?
You matter.
Oh, that's good.
Are you familiar with David Bohm?
No.
We had hosted this panel, Infinite Potential. You should watch this documentary. It's called Infinite Potential. David Bohm was one of the few scientists in the 30s, 40s, 50s of 1900s who was against the nuclear proliferation, nuclear bombs. And he was like outspoken about it. He kind of got like shoved to the side because the military industrial complex was like, no, we want to do this stuff. So he, even though he was one of the top physicists in the world, studying incredible stuff about potential, like how, like the power in every atom and the power that's existent all around us, and kind of Tesla-esque, right? But you should watch this documentary. I recommend Infinite Potential, as somebody who loves physics. Here's like, and he wasn't like, he was friends with, friends with Einstein and everything. So we hosted this panel, and we had kids on the panel, like scientists, neuroscientists, and physicists, and we had kids on the panel as well, because in my opinion, I feel kids have, we don't give kids enough credit and enough love and enough attention, especially right now with what's going on around the world, in our own communities, not even in other places, but like in our backyards. But also that maybe the wisdom of children is more profound than the wisdom of potentially of PhDs and experts, right? There's some simplicity in their wisdom. Before we even go dive down that thing, Brooke, I got a question for you. Why are there very few child or kid wisdom leaders in the West? In India, I'm Sikh. In the Sikhi tradition, we had a guru that was a 7-year-old guru, right, who was big into Ayurveda, and he like was a big time healer. We had there are many bodhisattvas who were kids. There are many Buddhas, right, the reincarnation of Buddha, that were kids. Krishna was a kid, right, and there's a lot of stories of him doing a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of mythology around the power and the wisdom of children, and why we need to respect them and love them. Where is that in Western traditions or Western psychology?
That's such an interesting question. And I, have no idea, to be perfectly honest, and yet I could speculate. It seems like probably it might be related to kind of some of this Western stuff that we were speaking to earlier in terms of how we frame the world. So if, knowledge and intellectual understanding, if that's the premise of what we think is wisdom, which it's certainly not. In fact, it can be at odds with true wisdom and embodied wisdom and living our values, right? That intellect can actually, it can facilitate it, but it can also impede it, right?
Sure.
And so, but mostly in our culture, we think of these things as related. And so, of course, we're going to dismiss children who don't know anything about, these complex philosophical ideas. And I love what you're saying. And I love that you had children on the panel, because there is such a purity and innocence and wonder and joy that it's like, if we're being real, that's all we're all trying to come back to. Like that's, if I had a definition of self-actualization, it would be to recover my childlike innocence, perhaps. Like that, when we're talking earlier about spirituality and play and mastery, and, it's like, if we can look to children, if we can become like children, and that's actually a very, New Testament idea, right? From the mouths of babes and become like a child.
Yeah.
And,
be like a child and ye shall enter heaven.
Right. So I think it's beautiful what you're sharing. And I had no idea about these child leaders and gurus and other cultures. So that's fascinating to me. And, I think about, one of the things that I meditate on quite often is my 4-year-old niece, who I just adore and love. And when I think about cultivating joy, I just imagine her running around, giggling at the top of her lungs, just, so just delighted by simple things in life. And I want to be in greater study of that. So I appreciate the invitation. to think about how I can apprentice myself more to children, really,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
who do we aspire to be like? And then
Right.
how do we apprentice ourselves to them? How do
Yeah.
we learn from them? Because
Yeah.
often I find that the people I study are not people who are embodying the values that I set out to live. So it's like, why am I studying from people who are telling me something with their minds, but I don't actually see their kindness? I don't
You don't
actually see
feel
them.
it.
I don't experience their play. I don't
Yeah.
experience their joy.
Right.
That's kind of interesting to me. It's like, well, what are you doing, Brooke? Why are you putting your energy into trying to, because it feels like a red herring, perhaps, in
Yeah.
a way,
Yeah.
if that's the right way to
Sure.
think about it. It feels like a diversion, like, oh, here's my comfortable approach to spirituality. Let me listen to this,
Totally.
highly intellectual. And I think that that philosophical inquiry can afford a genuine spiritual experience. I think it's one approach, and yet again, it's like sort of the comfortable Western intellectual approach that I find very non-threatening to my
Sure.
actual like daily habits. And I'm noticing that I want to be a little bit more disciplined and diligent about, how do I actually get more comfortable being uncomfortable and
Sure.
changing how I spend my time each day. Because if my daily life isn't reflective of my values, if how I spend my time isn't reflective of what I say I value, then
Yeah.
I am fundamentally living, I don't want to say a lie, that feels a little strong, but
Right.
living in conflict
Alignment.
with I'm living in conflict, out of alignment with my true authentic
Right.
expression. So
Right.
that's a big part of what I am constantly looking at, is how do I kind of, reorient, recalibrate,
Yep.
integrate, more and more of what I value into my daily life and how I spend my time.
Yeah, and if you were to title this episode anything, what I would love to explore more, and maybe we can keep having these discussions, but I find it quite troubling in our zeitgeist of psychology and therapy in the West, which is a very colonial, patriarchal, like substantially lots of blind spots, right, in therapy. And one of the problems I find is there's a clear lack of appreciation and acknowledgement of karma, like, or karma is the right word, karma, right? And karma is not just a negative thing, it could be a positive thing, but we often don't account, like we were sharing, if we're interconnected and there's any unnecessary suffering happening out in the world, you could talk about values as much as you want, but if the outside there's homeless people and there's children suffering and whatever it is, whatever you care about, whatever triggers you, and you're not leaning into that trigger by actually being of service, you're actually building up karma, because if you're intelligent and you're intellectual and you have resources and you have connections, you could do a lot. I mean, there's people who don't have anything that are doing stuff. So people who have resources and contacts and pedigrees, holy cow, you can reverse the course of hundreds of thousands of people with that power. Mind you, you don't know what kind of karma your ancestors have been carrying, whatever side they were on. Maybe they sold out their family to slavery, or maybe they harmed other communities, right? You're also carrying that inside of you. We know epigenetically we carry the trauma, but we could also be carrying antagonism also within us, right? We could also be carrying apathy within us. We could also be carrying bliss and ecstasy with us, and moments of incredible chivalry and incredible humanity. Those are also in our genetics, right? So by accessing these truths about humanity that have cultivated us to survive and exist and be resilient, these community health, collective liberation, right? Those things are not separate from our individual liberation, right? We're just one drop of the ocean, right? So if we're ignoring karmic psychology, we're like ignoring cause and effect. We're ignoring physics, no.
Yeah, a simple kind of way to think about karma from my perspective, this is probably incomplete, but is just the old idea that you reap what you sow, right? It's not, people think of it as like punitive often.
Yeah, but that's that's only one side of it, right?
Yeah, well, it's a Western, bastardization of, the idea, when actually it's really just, you give what you get. It's really, I call it the reflection principle. It's like, everything outside of us is reflecting something inside of us, and that there's kind of this constant feedback from life that is showing us about how we're showing up and who we are, and is giving us constant feedback that we can look at and integrate, to expand our awareness, to, and to continue growing and to continue kind of shedding the layers and dying to, the, damaging ideas or the ego or, all of this false stuff that gets in the way of us understanding our true nature and
Totally.
our related, our interconnectedness to the world.
Yeah, and you Karma yoga, like my greatest download in my life is my family, my mom who's like a saint, and my dad who is, no matter what he was going, even though he was like an alcoholic, he did embody those values of Karma yoga, proactive Karma yoga. Like that's what I witnessed in my life, that if you're proactive about serving other people that are less fortunate, if you're proactive about giving, if you're proactive before taking, right? If you're proactive in these spaces, you get beautiful things back to you. Like it's not extractive. Like to be practicing Karma yoga in a proactive way doesn't actually detract from your abundance. It actually
Right.
gives you the kind of abundance that also includes the community, that also includes safety, that also includes, like, you feel better holistically.
Right. Like that's why it's, quote, the old saying, it's more blessed to give than to receive. It's actually that giving is an act of generosity to the self. There's something so beautiful and rich about, being about offering yourself in service, about giving generously of your time, resources, attention, whatever it is that you have to give. There's something deeply rich about that when it comes from an authentic and present place. And so, yeah, I've been thinking about, really wanting to start volunteering again. Because I stopped because I was volunteering before COVID, and then I stopped, and because everything was closed, and it's like now it's not built into my schedule. And I just realized that there's something so pure in just connecting with people who are in need and offering yourself in service. And it just reminds you of what matters. Like when I do an exercise of, if I had all the, money and time in the world, if I didn't have any sort of constraints around resources, how would I spend my time? And I'm like, I think it would just be volunteering. Like, I think it would just be, I mean, not only, like, I would also do some things with friends and family, but really, like, I'm like, wow, I think that would be a lot more of how I spend my time. So how can I, instead of thinking, oh, I don't have enough time, how can I, build this into my life? Because it is a value. And
Sure, we could see it also in our personal relationships with people, just individually, like when we are in that space of like loving the person by like just being of service to that person. How beautiful is that? How beautiful does that relationship grow when it's reciprocal, right? It's like this incredible infinity loop of love. Can we create that with the people on the street? Can we create it with the children? Can we create it with our brothers and sisters that might be going through some trauma and maybe even some difficult things right now, all around us?
Beautiful. Well, Indy, it's been such a pleasure to have you. I'm so glad you were able to join me today. And I'm looking forward to continued conversations. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Brooke. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Got my yoga practice, y'all.